Why'd he do that when I just handed him flowers? For me, Emma, a florist who thought seeing an elderly man out of kindness lost in grief, sitting outside her store wishing to provide him with some solace, she thought it would be nice to give him flowers. Not a modest gesture of goodwill, but an hour later, an unannounced guest entered the elders sent a lawyer to her shop. A man giving her a formal agreement that caused her to cry, and she was unaware of her modest gesture of crying, of generosity would transform her life in ways she never. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Revealed Stories. I have another one today. A touching tale to tell you. Emma stated that it would cost $3, setting the tiny flowers on the countertop. That the client nodded and put the bills down, then removed the flowers that were wrapped using a courteous grin before making her way to the door. The bell swung shut and sounded softly behind her, silently departing the store. Again, after waiting for hours, this is her day's first sale, and now if she doesn't know why the store is empty again, when will she look at the next one? Drops on the open ledger next to her. The same grim tale is told by the numbers. They've been past due on falling sales for months. Expenses and a future that is sliding further away. She has tried everything in reach. Discounts, promotions, and even moving online. But nothing has altered the larger florists in the neighborhood with breathtaking exhibits and endless options keep luring clients away. In a few minutes, the choice has already been made. Days, she will permanently close the store, selling what's left and going for a walk out of the dream she had for years. She sighs and turns to face the structure. Big front window outside. The pavement retains a slight sheen from the previous rain falling at twilight, reflects the subdued gray. Her eyes wander across the morning sky, absently till it lands on a well-known depict a senior citizen seated on the seat close to the lamppost. As Emma has seen him a lot, and usually does times prior to each morning following his, he stops there for a few moments to rest. Just a few minutes before he left. Their eyes never stay there for very long. Met sometimes, and he consistently provides a courteous nod and exchange between good strangers briefly, simply, and familiarly. But this time, he wasn't merely taking. He had been sitting there for a brief rest. He drooped his shoulders for a while, eyes and hands clasped forward lowered. There was no nod of recognition, not a fleeting look in her direction. His typically calm demeanor had been swapped out for something more substantial. Emma felt a pang of worry pull at her chest. She realized then that she hadn't seen him. For several days, something had occurred. She hesitated for a second, thinking it wasn't her location to inquire. However, when she observed him, she sensed a calm tug within her before she had a chance to second. Emma, guessing herself, walked around the counter, pushing the glass of the shop open door. She moved over to the bench. Gentle but deliberate morning steps. She whispered softly as she initially walked up. The man's eyes stayed fixed without responding. Lost in a location, fixed on the pavement far away from this peaceful street. Then gradually he raised his head, and Emma gave him a tiny little, kind grin. I hadn't seen you in a long time. I simply wanted to see how you were doing a few days ago. He was silent for a while before, breathing shakily, he mentioned that my wife died last week. Said, and I was out of there, town for work, and when I returned, she was already. Emma knelt as her chest constricted, her fingers stroking the bench. I apologize, she murmured softly, for the worn wood. I can't even begin to understand how difficult that is. He must have nodded, his lips quivering, was unable to say goodbye, because I should have been in the hospital. Ought to have given her a final handshake. His voice faltered, heavy with remorse. Averted his gaze as though attempting to steady himself. But the loss's burden was too much to conceal. Emma remained silent. Some grief wasn't meant to be experienced straight away. Replied that it was intended to be heard. So she gave him space as the hush descended. Room to breathe and feel. But as she observing him, a silent pain arose inside. She was unable to ease his suffering, although she might be able to give him something. Tiny item that could help to lighten the burden of his grief. Even if it was just for her eyes briefly strayed to the flowers throughout the years in her store, she had observed innumerable clients walk in their faces changing at the sight of fresh flowers, had a way of getting in touch with people and making them feel observed. Even by people who weren't anticipating them couldn't resist grinning as she gave her a rose. "Feet, wait here," she whispered, slipping lightly. She went back inside and looked over the rows of flowers that her store may have been struggling. But the significance of the blooms had always been carefully. She started choosing each stem with her hands. White lies intention for memory blue, and pink carnations for appreciation for memories as well. Forget-me-nots. Priceless to lose, every flower that has carried a subdued message interwoven with something profound and delicate that she carefully wrap and tie the stems. It wasn't much with a delicate satin ribbon. However, she hoped that in some tiny manner they would reassure him with the Emma held the bouquet in her hands. Retreated outside into the fresh morning air. Felt lighter in some way now, conveying the delicate aroma of fresh blooms. She approached the bench. She knelt, taking cautious, deliberate steps. She shifted slightly to look him in the eye. The flowers in the bouquet, for him, have a method of giving individuals a sense of visibility. She remarked, "Perhaps they can do it for you gently." The man paused his fingers today. As they passed across the petals, they shuddered. A strong feeling constricted his throat. He was momentarily at a loss for words. Afterward, he whispered, "My wife, she cherished I used to bring her flowers every day." Emma nodded warmly this week, but stable. "Then leave these for her," stated, and for you took a big inhale that made him tremble. His grief, as he held the bouquet, hadn't vanished, but it was softened by another thing, a silent remind yourself that even when you're grieving, kindness could flourish for a while. He only clasped the blossoms between his fingers, following the fragile petals. Then, as if his chest's weight had somewhat decreased, he took a deep breath and spoke once more. After 52 years of marriage, he told us she was my voice, quieter now, but constant. Emma listened to my first love and my last. Feeling compelled to share this rather than only with her, but possibly with him as well. As you are aware, individuals frequently discuss how love evolves over time, fading as it loses its luster. Yet when she's around, it only grew more powerful. She had this method of adding a special touch to every average day despite all those years. Simply seeing her grin as soon as I entered the room, that was sufficient. A tiny bit of bittersweet I used to jest with him, but he ghosted his lips. That she deceived me into getting married to her, but in reality, I would have gotten married. Emma felt 100 times over that his comments caused a knot to form in her throat. Were love, not merely recollections. Still alive, wrapped within each syllable in spite of his sadly. "She seems like a lovely woman," Emma whispered gently, and he nodded while holding on to. She was slightly tightening the bouquet. Emma put a gentle touch on the side of anchoring herself on the bench. "I'm still with you right now," she said. "Gently in each moment and recollection you gave, and in each blossom that reminds you of the old man who used to be her." Glanced down at his fingers holding the bouquet, rubbing up against the fragile petals till he was silent for a long time. Then he let out a slow, quiet nod, and Emma offered a tiny smile I should return her softly. "But if you decide to quit at any time, considering that flowers are always present." She turned to face the store, anticipating that he would depart, but something caused her to turn around. The old man's eyes had remained fixed, hovered over the shop as though remembering every detail, as though it were visible in a different way than previously. Then, following it, "Before you leave, pause what he said, ma'am." Emma blinked. "What's your full name?" A little taken aback. It wasn't in strange query, but anything regarding the way he inquired made her. Emma Carter paused, observing him intently. Why, a tiny smirk of knowing brushed his lips against his eyes. Contained a deeper something illegible. "I simply wanted to keep in mind the name of the one who made me think about." Emma tilted something significant today. A little bit of her head. And what she questioned the older man, who tracked the bouquet ribbon, his touch was almost cautious, honoring the fact that kindness is still important, that being noticed, even briefly, can imply that there was a weight attached to his remarks were not filled with sorrow, but rather with silent intention, as though at that very time he had decided something she wasn't yet aware of. Emma observed him getting up from the bench and left, moving slowly, but she purposefully stood there for a short while. Extended observation of his form fading into the distance, an odd sensation creeping, and she couldn't quite identify the one on her chest as she returned to her store, and couldn't get rid of the sensation that there was a gentle shift. However, importantly, the morning was hazy. Emma proceeded with her usual cutting, fresh bouquets on stalks, but my thoughts kept returning to the elderly man's remarks regarding the manner in which he had gazed at her. Her name remained silent but tenacious. She lost herself in the hand's steady motions switching between tasks, and the upcoming minutes lasted an hour, during which the gentle rustle of petals and the city's distant hum filling the quiet outside. Then simply the shop bell rang once more before noon, and she looked up anticipating a response. From a counter, client. But the individual who entered was not looking for flowers. He was wearing a sharp suit and a leather briefcase. He emanated a calm authority. Everything about him, including his stance, maintaining a steady glance, also felt excessively formal. Intentional for Emma's. A floral store lawyers with tight stomachs didn't only enter tiny stores like hers without a rationale behind his approach to the counter, and he asked Emma Carter, looking into her eyes, as if Emma hesitated before confirming her identification. Briefly before acknowledging that the man gave a small nod while surveying the shop before turning back to "I'm here for a client," she said, "I've been asked to bring this to you." He opened his folder and took out a place. The sealed envelope on her name was bolded on the counter. Emma gazed at the exact letters with uneasiness. Infiltrating, she asked her, "What's this about?" The lawyer's voice was quieter than previously, changed his position a little. "My client will arrive soon to provide an explanation in detail. I suggest that you open." Her fingers shook a little as she weighed the envelope as she lifted it up. Unidentified person putting pressure on her breast. She could sense the attorney's gaze on her as she inserted her finger beneath the seal and unfolded the contents with care. She noticed a contract right away, and as she glanced over the sentences, her breath caught as she looked around the contract once more, but the words didn't seem real. Her fingers gripped the page more tightly, as bewilderment and incredulity entangled. This wasn't a bill or a legal document inside her. Observe that it was something different, unthinkable. She never imagined something like this came her way. Her eyes were burning with tears after spending years of hardships and distributing flowers merely to make people happy. A stranger was now making an offer. Her hand was coded beyond her imagination, a silent SOB that came out of her mouth. Shoulders trembled from its weight. Her voice was barely audible as she swallowed hard. "Why did he do this for me?" I whispered. The attorney stayed motionless, providing no additional justification for the paper she was holding, clouded as her eyes filled with tears. Found it difficult to control her breathing, trembling fingers against the impossible the truth about what she was holding at the time. A soft bell reverberated throughout the store, a familiar sound that is somehow unique. It wasn't just the bell this time, declaring to a client that it was the time everything altered. An old guy stood in the doorway. His warm eyes were silent. Recognizing before she could consider her as her feet propelled her on, she grabbed for his hands, firmly grasping them, as though attaching herself to a tangible object. She let out a trembling breath through her fingers, putting pressure on the roughness of "as you did this," even though her voice faltered. The elderly man had a soft, almost being aware that "you showed me kindness when you didn't need to be," he added quietly. "It's mine." Turn, a lump tightened in Emma's throat, developed as she quickly blinked in an attempt to calm herself in the face of the overpowering and emotional outburst. Emma drew her eyes back a little, floating toward the document while holding onto it in her shaking hands. She lowered her gaze to regulate her breathing. The pages skimming the text, once more as though trying to persuade herself that this was true. It was a lengthy agreement that arranged for daily flower deliveries to shelters, senior homes, and hospitals that don't for years. Not just a few months, the elderly paid for all expenses. Man, every element was thoughtfully placed, and the enormity of it was overwhelming her. This wasn't simply a business, therefore my mind was racing. Deal. She had stability and a future. I never thought I would be worry-free. Regarding difficult months when trying to make ends meet, moreover, her flowers and her work would provide consolation to those in need. Emma swallowed hard emotions the most. She stared up at the bulge in her chest. The elderly man's blurred vision, which she muttered. Unshed tears. Why me? I don't have unusual, she said, shaking her head. Flowers at my tiny shop. There are larger floral designers, yet they lack your heart. The elderly guy softly interrupted her. With an understanding grinning, his eyes strayed to the bouquet, exhibit his melting expression, remembering my wife's love of flowers. He whispered, as though addressing the past. She always thought they could fix that light could be brought by even one bloom. Briefly inside someone's darkest moments, he appeared to be deep in meditation, his gaze following the fragile petals. As seeing anything outside of him, he took a deep breath and turned back to Emma's face was gentle, but nevertheless. You made me think of her, that the flowers you sent me weren't just stems and petals were benevolent. Warmth, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Emma felt a constriction in her body, the weight of his words resting in his chest deep. So the man proceeded with his steady voice with a lot of subdued intensity. One wished to capture that emotion that you provided me and shared it with others. I desire those who are forgotten, lonely, and in pain. People to experience my emotions. Even for a brief, Emma's breath came out in a shuddering moment. Nobody had ever had faith in her. Stored this way prior to her voice becoming I don't know. Scarcely more than a whisper. You don't have to say what you want to say. Anything the dude said while using a little just keep doing what you're doing and don't worry. Emma blinked. The flowers speak for you. Taking away the emotional sting. This wasn't merely paperwork. It was a fresh start. The attorney who had kept quiet watching at last moved forward and positioned a pen next to the paper. Miss Carter, whenever you're ready. Simply a signature, after which we can proceed with. His voice was kind but professional. Emma let out a steady breath while skimming her fingers. She wasn't simply signing a document. Contract. She was entering a new phase. Anything new that she didn't anticipate. Emma appeared at the store the following morning. The air was clear and fresh earlier than normal. A gentle golden glow came through the windows. She discovered the old man, already anticipating his steady, pleasant smile as together they meticulously selected and roses and other fresh flowers were arranged. Each bouquet is brimming with lilies and daisies. With vibrant flower boxes, they got in the man's car and drove off. The hospital within was their first destination. The disinfectant's sterile smell continued to hover in midair. But when Emma and the senior citizen presented bouquets to the environment changed for nurses. Arranged the flowers on nightstands, and some of the patients were too feeble to speak. A weak woman's timid smiles held a single. Her eyes rose near her chest, overflowing with silent appreciation. Afterward, they went to an assisted living facility. As soon as Emma entered, she sensed the sluggish movements due to the weight of time and the air far away looks. But as she and the room softened as the man distributed flowers. Wrinkled hands eagerly grasped the delicate. One elderly man laughed while tucking a flower behind his ear, and a lady in these whispered in a wheelchair, "Remind me of my garden." The shelter was their last destination. The atmosphere was somber and full of weariness and doubt. But as Emma arranged flowers on tables and distributed mothers in the room with little flowers. A young guy transformed and took a flower, spinning it around with his small fingers prior to putting it to his nose, while a woman smiles, held her bouquet tightly while fighting back tears. Emma observed everything as it happened in silence. The power of a seemingly simple act wasn't only concerning flowers. It was about hope, making folks aware that they weren't unseen. As the days went by, Emma's flower shop changed. What had been a peaceful, once struggling company now prospered with orders for fresh purpose did not rise. Not only from the agreement, but also from individuals. People were aware of her tale, of how a good deed has spread throughout each. She placed flowers in the morning, not simply our clients, but also for people in need. I sincerely hope the old man's visit his press frequently serves as a reminder of the day. Emma never anticipated how everything would alter. Anything in exchange for providing only one blossom. But it had altered her reality in ways that this narrative surprised or touched your heart. Remember to enjoy it. Also, subscribe for more motivational content, stories, and if you think that, spread the word about the power of kindness. You never know who might find it important to hear. Watch the videos on your website today as well. Screen for further inspirational tales that won't want to overlook.